Chapter 31. Winter. A dead leaf skittered in the moonlight as I wriggled my way through the 2-brick hole to the other side. I took off my armband. I knew Janina was somewhere behind me. On this bitterly cold night, the streets of Warsaw were almost as deserted as those of the ghetto. But the Blue Camel Hotel was always bright and warm. As I sailed through the revolving door, I caught a glimpse of red hair in the lobby. I went around again and stopped inside. It was Yuri! He was dressed in fine clothes. White shirt, black trousers, shoes. I watched him for a moment. He was emptying ashtrays into a wheeled trash can that he pushed around the lobby. I called out, "Yuri!" He didn't hear me. He was headed for a hallway at the back of the lobby. "Yuri!" I ran after him. When I got to the hallway, he was gone. I went down the hallway, peeking into dark rooms. Suddenly, I was off my feet and flying into one of them. The door slammed shut. I couldn't see a thing. But I knew it was Yuri holding me and whispering into my ear, "What are you doing here?" "I saw you. Ow!" He was squeezing my arm. "I called you. Didn't you see me? What are you doing here?" He shook me. "Never mind what I'm doing here. I work in the laundry. If I see you in here again, I'll tell them to shoot you. My name is not Yuri here. You never call me that." His hand squeezed my neck. His breath was in my face. "Do you hear?" I nodded, choking. "Never come in here again. Get out, now!" The door opened, and I was flung into the bright hallway. Outside the street, I expected to see Janina. She was usually within sight, following me, but pretending she wasn't. I didn't see her. Something inside me said, "Good." Something else said, "I don't like this." I disappeared into my usual shadows and alleyways. I did not seek out new places on this night. I went to familiar, reliable garbage cans and a few unguarded home pantries, places we both knew well. I kept expecting to bump into her. I kept glancing around. She wasn't there. The moon, as always, had moved halfway across the sky by the time I was done with my shopping. It was full on this night, my least favorite kind of moon. Normally, I dashed for the wall and practically dove through the hole. This time, I stopped at the wall and waited, crouching in the shadow. I could not stay long. The wall was patrolled. Nothing but the patrols moved in Warsaw at this time of night. I kept waiting, hoping to see a tiny fragment of shadow break away and come running to the wall, to me. Somewhere on the other side of the wall, a dog barked. A whistle blew. I thought of the other boys. I hoped they were safe. Something moved down along the wall, a glint of silver in the moonlight. A patrol was coming. I stuffed my sack through the hole, then myself. A minute later, I found her. She was near a street corner, standing still, not even trying to hide herself. Her sack of food dumped on the ground beside her. I did not want to call out. I approached her quietly from behind. She did not move. She seemed to be looking at something. She was looking up, and then I saw a body was hanging from the crossbar of the streetlight, whose lamp had long since stopped shining. It was hanging by the neck. I wondered why the hanging body had stopped her. It was not the first she had seen. Death was as familiar to us as life. Even though still breathing, walking, they looked as if they were waiting for someone to tell them they were dead. So why was my heart hammering my chest? Because the body, I could see now as I stopped beside her, had one arm. It was a boy. It was Oleg. A sign was hanging across his chest. In the moonlight, it was easy to see the words, but I could not read. Flat on the ground, his shadow was hanging too. Chapter 32. I was a smuggler. The next morning, Enos told me what the sign said. "They'll hang us all," he said. "Not me," I said. "They can't catch me." "Not me," said Gina. "They can't catch me." Enos laughed. We sat on the rocks of the ruins of the butcher shop. No one said anything. Ferdy smoked. Kuba stared at the dust. For once, he had nothing funny to say. Big Henrik bawled. He took off his shoes and pounded the frozen earth with them. He threw away the shoes and bawled some more. I said, "I saw Yuri." No one looked up. Janina spat in the dirt. I hate your angels. The next day, the first snow flurries came. Children held their faces to the sky, trying to catch flakes on their tongues. I visited the orphanage. Dr. Korsak was teaching the children a song. When he saw me, he said, "Misha, come join us. Sing with us." I stood in the middle of the children and sang the words. After the singing, we were each given a cabbage cake and a spoonful of fat. I never saw Dr. Korsak eat. Everyone had shoes. When I left, I walked about the ghetto singing my songs in the snowflakes. I saw a boy eating a newspaper. A voice called, "Misha Pilsudski! Misha Milgram!" I recognized the voice, but I couldn't believe my ears. I turned. It was Uncle Shepsel. Since the day the Jews paraded into the ghetto, I had not seen Uncle Shepsel outside the room, except for lineups. He was smiling, showing the world his brown teeth. His hand came down on my shoulder. Misha, is it not a beautiful day?" I looked around. It seemed like any other day to me, gray. Up the street, a man was banging his head against a stone wall, but that was an agreeable fellow. Yes, I said. Yes. He looked around. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath and stood like that for a while. I thought he had gone to sleep. The head of the man up the street was red, but he was still banging. Uncle Shepsel opened his eyes and smiled down on me. I had seen the same smile in the room lately, as he read the book that had changed him from a Jew to a Lutheran. He removed my cap and mussed my hair. Lice eggs flew like baby snowflakes. He replaced my cap. He nodded dreamily. Suddenly, his expression changed. He seemed confused. He looked hard into my face and did not seem to know me. "You go. Every night you go," he said. "Why do you come back?" I did not have an answer. Maybe he found it in my face, for after a while he turned and walked off. Up the street, the man was on the ground. My feet led me back to the room. Mrs. Milgram was lying on the mattress, as usual, facing the wall. She looked the same in every way, and yet I knew at once that she was dead. Mr. Milgram was sitting on the edge of the mattress. Janina was in his lap. Her face was in his chest, and she was crying. Her father rocked her back and forth. When he looked at me, his eyes were shining. Ever since Mr. Milgram had made me a member of the family, I had wanted to call Mrs. Milgram mother. I did so once, and she replied, "I'm not your mother." I was confused. By the time I decided to try again, she had turned her back on the room for good, and now she was dead, and Mr. Milgram's eyes were making me sad. I put my hand on his shoulder, as Dr. Korsak had often done to me. I looked into his shining eyes, and I said, "Tata?" He took me onto his lap next to Janina, and now I was being rocked back and forth too. I tried to cry like my sister, but I was too busy looking for Mrs. Milgram's angel. We sat up all night with the body of Mrs. Milgram, except for Uncle Shepsel, who went to sleep when he returned to the room. In the morning, Mr. Milgram left and came back with the undertaker. He gave the undertaker a small bottle of white pills. He said he had been saving them for this day. He reached under the mattress and pulled out a little black bowl-shaped piece of cloth. I wondered what it was. He put it on his head. It was a hat. The undertaker and his two helpers carried Mrs. Milgram down to the courtyard where a cart was waiting. Mrs. Milgram was laid in the cart and covered with a ragged scrap of cabbage-colored wool that had once been a blanket. The undertaker led the way out of the courtyard. Then came the helpers pulling the cart. Then came the three of us. Uncle Shepsel stayed back in the room. We were the smallest parade ever. There were many bodies along the way. I was surprised that we're not picking up some of them, but I was also pleased, because I did not want to see Mrs. Milgram wind up at the bottom of a heap. I had never been so slow before. Even when I was not fleeing, I was running or at least walking fast. Everything I did was fast. I forced myself to keep pace with Mr. Milgram and Janina. He held my hand. I kept telling myself, my mother is dead in the cart. I must not go faster than her. We passed the orphanage. Dr. Korsak stood at the doorway. He put his hands together and closed his eyes and said words. I could not hear them, but I could see them puff from his mouth into the winter air. Many women passed us going the other way. They all wore coats and wraps of fox and other furs. They looked very sad. Some were crying. They had been ordered to turn in all furs at Stocky Station. A man went marching past us in the street. He had no shirt or coat on, no shoes or rags on his feet. He made peeping sounds from a silver pipe that he held to his mouth. He waved the pipe in the air and called out, "Children, children, come with me. We'll go to the Candy Mountain. Follow me, follow me." At the gate of the cemetery on Geisha Street, Mr. Milgram gave the bottle of pills and we were let in. We went to an empty plot of ground. The undertaker's helpers found shovels and dug a hole. A crow sat nearby on a tilting tombstone. It stared at me. I thought it spoke to me. In its croaky voice, it said the same thing over and over. I could not understand. I left Mrs. Milgram's side and walked to the crow. "What?" I called. The crow spoke one last time and flew off. As they were laying Mrs. Milgram in her grave, the first bomb fell on the other side of the wall. I felt it in my feet. I looked up. It was raining bombs. The ground was trembling, as if all the dead had decided to leave their graves at once. The undertaker and his helpers and the cemetery guards all ran. Mr. Milgram just stood there, staring into the hole. A bomb exploded several blocks away on our side of the wall. Then more came. Mr. Milgram looked at us. "Children," he said. He lifted each of us and lowered us into the hole with Mrs. Milgram. "Cover your eyes." We curled around each other on the scrap of wool at the feet of Mrs. Milgram. The earth was thumping like a heart. When I peeked upward, I saw Mr. Milgram sitting on the edge of the grave hole, his feet dangling towards us. Janina pulled something from her pocket. It was a milkweed pod. She must have plucked it from the plant in the alley. It looked empty. She blew into it. 3 or 4 puffs rose into the air. They sailed up and out of the grave, past Mr. Milgram and into the rectangle of gray sky and the black falling teardrops of the bombs.